and a partridge in a pear tree. When the holidays rolled around, we didn't have any money for presents. So Dad did what he always does when we don't have enough money. He took what little money we did have and ran away to get drunk. He left on Christmas Eve and came back on January 2nd. With an epic hangover, he just lay on his bed for hours. Hey, Dad, I said. Hey, kid, I'm sorry about Christmas. It's okay, I said. But it wasn't okay. It was about as far from okay as you can get. If okay was the earth, then I was standing on Jupiter. I don't know why I said it was okay. For some reason, I was promoting the feelings of the man who had broken my heart yet again. Geez, I just won the silver medal in the Children of Alcoholic Olympics. Hey, I got you something, he said. What? It's in my boot. I picked up one of his cowboy boots. No, the other one. Inside, under that foot pad thing. I picked up the other boot and dug inside. Man, that thing smelled like booze and fear and failure. I found a wrinkled and damp $5 bill. Merry Christmas, he said. Wow, drunk for a week, my father must have really wanted to spend those last $5. Shoot, you can buy a bottle of the worst whiskey for $5. He could have spent that $5 and stayed drunk for another day or two. But he saved it for me. It was a beautiful and ugly thing. Thanks, Dad, I said. He was asleep. Merry Christmas, I said, and I kissed him on the cheek. The next chapter, red versus white. You probably think I've completely fallen in love with white people and that I don't see anything good in Indians. Well, that's false. I love my big sister. I think she's double crazy and random. Ever since she moved, she sent me all these great Montana postcards. They're beautiful landscapes and beautiful Indians and buffalo and rivers and huge insects. Great postcards. But she still can't find a job and she's still living in that crappy little trailer. But she's happy and working hard on her book. She made a New Year's resolution to finish her book by summertime. Her book is about hope, I guess. I think she wants me to share in her romance, and I love her for that. And I love my mother and father and my grandma. Ever since I've been at Reardon and I've seen how great parents do their great parenting, I realize that my folks are pretty good. Sure, my dad has a drinking problem and my mom can be a little eccentric, but they make sacrifices for me. They worry about me. They talk to me, and best of all, they listen to me. I've learned that the worst thing a parent can do is ignore their children. And trust me, there are plenty of Reardon kids who get ignored by their parents. There are white parents, especially fathers, who never come to the school. They don't come for their kids' games, their concerts or plays or carnivals. I'm friends with some white kids and I've never met their fathers. That's absolutely freaky. On the res, you know every kid's father, their mother, their grandparents, their dog, cat, and shoe size. I mean, yeah, Indians are screwed up, but we're really close to each other. We know each other. Everybody knows everybody. But despite the fact that Reardon is a tiny town, people can still be strangers to each other. I've learned that white people, especially fathers, are good at hiding in plain sight. I mean, yeah, my dad would sometimes go on a drinking binge and be gone for a week, but those white dads can completely disappear without ever leaving the living room. They can just blend into their chairs. They become their chairs. So, okay, I'm not all goofy-eyed in love with white people, all right? Plenty of old white guys still give me the stink eye just for being an Indian. And a lot of them think I shouldn't be in the school at all. I'm realistic, okay? I've thought about these things. And maybe I haven't done enough thinking, but I've done enough to know that it's better to live in Reardon than in Wellpinit. Maybe only slightly better. But from where I'm standing, slightly better is the size of the Grand Canyon. And hey, do you want to know the very best thing about Reardon? It's Penelope, of course, and maybe Gordy. And do you want to know the very best thing about Wellpinit? My grandmother. She was amazing. She was the most amazing person in the world. Do you want to know the very best thing about my grandmother? She was tolerant. And I know that's a hilarious thing to say about your grandmother. I mean, when people compliment their grandmothers, especially their Indian grandmothers, they usually say things like, my grandmother is so wise, and my grandmother is so kind, and my grandmother has seen everything. And yeah, my grandmother was smart and kind and had traveled to about 100 different Indian reservations, but that had nothing to do with her greatness. My grandmother's greatest gift was tolerance. Now, in the old days, Indians used to be forgiving of any kind of eccentricity, to be different. In fact, weird people were often celebrated. Epileptics were often shamans because people just assumed that God gave seizure visions to the lucky ones. And gay people were seen as magical too. I mean, like in many cultures, men viewed as warriors and women were viewed as caregivers. But gay people, being both male and female, were seen as both warriors and caregivers. Gay people could do anything. They were like Swiss Army knives. And my grandmother had no use for all the gay bashing and homophobia in the world, especially among other Indians. Geez, she said, who cares if a man wants to marry another man? All I want to know is who's going to pick up all the dirty socks. Of course, ever since white people showed up and brought along their Christianity and their fears of eccentricity, of being different, Indians have gradually lost all of their tolerance. Indians can be just as judgmental and hateful as any white person, but not my grandmother. She still hung on to that old time Indian spirit, you know? She always approached each new person and each new experience the exact same way. Whenever we went to Spokane, my grandmother would talk to anybody, even the homeless people, even the homeless guys who were talking to invisible people. My grandmother would start talking to the invisible people too. Why would she do that? Well, she said, how can I be sure there aren't invisible people in the world? Scientists didn't believe in the mountain gorilla for hundreds of years, and now look. So if scientists can be wrong, then all of us can be wrong. I mean, what if all those invisible people are scientists? Think about that one. So I thought about that one. After I decided to go to Reardon, I felt like an invisible mountain gorilla scientist. My grandmother was the only one who thought it was a 100% good idea. Think of all the new people you're going to meet, she said. That's the whole point of life, you know, to meet new people. I wish I could go with you, Junior. It's such an exciting idea. Of course, my grandmother had met thousands, tens of thousands of other Indians at powwows all over the country. Every powwow Indian knew her. Yep, my grandmother was powwow famous. Everybody loved her, and she loved everybody. In fact, last week, she was walking back home from a mini powwow at the Spokane Tribal Community Center when she was struck and killed by a drunk driver. Yep, you read that right. She didn't die right away. The reservation paramedics kept her alive long enough to get to the hospital in Spokane, where she died during emergency surgery. Massive internal injuries. At the hospital, my mother wept and wailed. She had lost her mother. When anybody, no matter how old you are, loses a parent, I think it hurts the same as if you were only 5 years old, you know? I think all of us are always 5 years old in the presence and absence of our parents. My father was all quiet and serious with the surgeon, a big, handsome white guy. Did she say anything before she died? He asked. Yes, the surgeon said. She said, forgive him. Forgive him? My father asked. I think she was referring to the drunk driver who killed her. Wow. My grandmother's last act on earth was a call for forgiveness, love, and tolerance. She wanted us to forgive Gerald, the dumbass Spokane Indian alcoholic who ran her over and killed her. I think my dad wanted to go find Gerald and beat him to death. I think my mother would have helped him. I think I would have helped him too. But my grandmother wanted us to forgive her murderer. Even dead, she was a better person than us. The tribal cops found Gerald hiding out at Benjamin Lake, and they took him to jail. And after we got back from the hospital, My father went over to see Gerald to kill him or forgive him. I think the tribal cops might have looked the other way if my father had decided to strangle Gerald. But my father, respecting my grandmother's last wishes, left Gerald alone to the justice system, which ended up sending him to prison for 18 months. After he got out, Gerald moved to a reservation in California, and nobody saw him again. But my family had to bury my grandmother. I mean, it's natural to bury your grandmother. Grandparents are supposed to die first, but they're supposed to die of old age. They're supposed to die of a heart attack or a stroke or of cancer or of Alzheimer's. They are not supposed to get run over and killed by a drunk driver. I mean, the thing is, plenty of Indians have died because they were drunk, and plenty of drunken Indians have killed other drunken Indians. But my grandmother had never drunk alcohol in her life, not one drop. That's the rarest kind of Indian in the world. I know only like 5 Indians in our whole tribe who have never drunk alcohol, and my grandmother was one of them. Drinking would shut down my seeing and my hearing and my feeling, she used to say. And why would I want to be in a world if I couldn't touch the world with all of my senses intact? Well, my grandmother has left this world, and now she's roaming the afterlife. Wake. We held grandmother's wake 3 days later. We knew that people would be coming in large numbers, but we were stunned because almost 2,000 Indians showed up that day to say goodbye, and nobody gave me any crap. I mean, I was still the kid who had betrayed the tribe and that couldn't be forgiven, but I was also the kid who had lost his grandmother, and everybody knew that losing my grandmother was horrible. So they all waved the white flag that day and let me grieve in peace. And after that, they stopped hassling me whenever they saw me on the res. I mean, I still lived on the res, right? And I had to go get the mail and get milk from the trading post and just hang out, right? So I was still part of the res. People had either ignored me or called me names or pushed me, but they stopped after my grandmother died. I guess they realized that I was in enough pain already, or maybe they realized they'd just been cruel jerks. I wasn't suddenly popular, of course, but I wasn't a villain anymore. No matter what else happened between my tribe and me, I would always love them for giving me peace on the day of my grandmother's funeral. Even Rowdy just stood far away. He would always be my best friend, no matter how much he hated me. We had to move the coffin out on the Spokane tribal longhouse and set it on the 50-yard line of the football field. Ted. We were lucky the weather was good. Yep, about 2,000 Indians and a few white folks sat and stood on the football field as we all said goodbye to the greatest Spokane Indian in history. I knew that my grandmother would have loved that send-off. It was crazy and fun and sad. My sister wasn't able to come to the funeral. That was the worst part about it. She didn't have enough money to get back, I guess. That was sad. But she promised she'd sing 100 mourning songs that day. We all have to find our own ways to say goodbye. Tons of people told stories about my grandmother, but there was one story that mattered most of all. About 10 hours into the wake, a white guy stood. He was a stranger. He looked vaguely familiar. I knew I'd seen him before, but I couldn't think of where. We all wondered exactly who he was, but nobody knew. That wasn't surprising. My grandmother had met thousands of people. The white guy was holding a big suitcase. He held that thing tight to his chest as he talked. "Hello," he said. "My name is Ted." And then I remembered who he was. He was a rich and famous billionaire white dude. He was famous for being filthy rich and really weird. My grandmother knew billionaire Ted. Wow. We were all excited to hear this guy's story. And so what did he have to say? We all groaned. We'd expected this white guy to be original, but he was yet another white guy who showed up on the res because he loved Indian people so much. Do you know how many white strangers show up on Indian reservations every year and they start telling Indians how much they love them? Thousands. It's sickening and boring. "Listen," Ted said, "I know you've heard that before. I know white people say that all the time. but I still need to say it. I love Indians. I love your songs and your dances, and I love your souls. I love your art. I collect Indian art. Oh God, he was a collector. Those guys made Indians feel like insects pinned to a display board. I looked around the football field. Yep, all of my cousins were squirming like beetles and butterflies with pins stuck in their hearts. I've collected Indian art for decades, Ted said. I have old spears and old arrowheads. I have old armor. I have blankets and paintings and sculptures and baskets and jewelry. Blah, 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 blah. And I have old powwow dance outfits, Ted said. Now, that made everybody sit up and pay attention. About 10 years ago, this Indian guy knocked on the door of my cabin in Montana. Cabin? My butt. Ted, you lived in a 40-room log mansion just outside of Bozeman. Well, I didn't know this stranger, Ted said, but I always open my door to Indians. Oh, please. And this particular Indian stranger was holding a very beautiful powwow dance outfit, a woman's powwow dance outfit. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. It was all beaded blue and red and yellow with a Thunderbird design. It must have weighed 50 pounds, and I couldn't imagine the strength of the woman who could dance beneath that magical burden. Every woman in the world could dance that way. Well, this Indian stranger said he was in a desperate situation. His wife was dying of cancer, and he needed money to pay for her medicine. I knew he was lying. I knew he had stolen the outfit. I can always smell a thief. Smell yourself, Ted. And I knew I should call the police on this thief. I knew I should take that outfit away and find the real owner. But it was so beautiful and so perfect that I gave the Indian stranger $1,000 and sent him on his way. And I kept the outfit. Whoa, was Ted coming here to make a confession? And why had he chosen my grandmother's funeral for his confession? For years, I felt terrible. I'd look at that outfit hanging on the wall of my Montana cabin. Mansion, Ted. It's a mansion. Go ahead. You can say it. Mansion. And then I decided to do some research. I hired an anthropologist, an expert, and he quickly pointed out that the outfit was obviously of interior Salish origin. And after doing a little research, he discovered that the outfit was Spokane Indian, to be specific. And then a few years ago, he visited your reservation undercover. And he learned that this stolen outfit once belonged to a woman named Grandmother Spirit. We all gasped. This was a huge shock. I wondered if we were all part of some crazy reality show called When Billionaires Pretend to Be Human. I looked around for the cameras. Well, ever since I learned who really owned this outfit, I've been torn. I've always wanted to give it back, but I wanted to keep it too. I couldn't sleep some nights because I was so torn up by it. Yep, even billionaires have dark nights of the soul. And well, I finally couldn't take it anymore. I packed up the outfit and I headed for your reservation. Here to hand deliver the outfit back to Grandmother Spirit. And I get here only to discover that she has passed on to the next world. Oh, it's just devastating. We were all completely silent. This was the weirdest thing any of us had ever witnessed. And we're Indian, so trust me, we've seen some really weird stuff. But I have the outfit here, Ted said. He opened up his suitcase and he pulled out the outfit and he held it up. It was 50 pounds, so he struggled with it. Anybody would have struggled with it. So if any of Grandmother Spirit's children are here, I'd love to return this outfit to them. My mother stood and walked up to Ted. I'm Grandmother Spirit's only daughter, she said. My mother's voice had gotten all formal. Indians are good at that. We'll be talking and laughing and carry on like normal, and then boom, we get all serious and sacred and start talking like some English royalty. Oh, dearest daughter, Ted said, I hereby return your stolen goods. I hope you forgive me for returning it too late. Well, there's nothing to forgive, Ted, my mother said. Grandmother's spirit wasn't a powwow dancer. Ted's mouth dropped open. Excuse me, he said. My mother loved going to powwows, but she had never danced. She never owned a dance outfit. This couldn't be hers. Ted didn't say anything. He couldn't say anything. In fact, looking at all the beads and the design, this doesn't look Spokane at all. I don't recognize the work. Does anybody here recognize the beadwork? No, everybody said. It looks more Sioux to me. Maybe Aglala. Maybe I'm not an expert. You're the anthropologist. Your anthropologist wasn't much of an expert either. He got this way wrong. We all just sat there in silence as Ted mulled that over. Then he packed his outfit back in his suitcase and hurried over to his waiting car and sped away. For about 2 minutes, we all sat quiet. Who knew what to say? And then my mother started laughing, and that set us all off. 2,000 Indians laughed at the same time. We kept laughing. It was the most glorious noise I'd ever heard. And I realized that, sure, Indians were drunk and sad and displaced and crazy and mean, but dang, we knew how to laugh. And when it comes to death, we know that laughter and tears are pretty much the same thing. And so, laughing and crying, we said goodbye to my grandmother. And when we said goodbye to one grandmother, we said goodbye to all of them. Each funeral was a funeral for all of us. We lived and died together. All of us laughed when they lowered my grandmother into the ground, and all of us laughed when they covered her with dirt. And all of us laughed as we walked and drove and rode our way back to our lonely, lonely houses. Valentine heart. A few days after I gave Penelope a homemade Valentine, and she said she forgot it was Valentine's Day, my dad's best friend, Eugene, was shot in the face in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven in Spokane. Way drunk, Eugene was shot and killed by one of his good friends, Bobby, who was too drunk to even remember pulling the trigger. The police think Eugene and Bobby fought over the last drink in a bottle of wine. When Bobby was sober enough to realize what he'd done, he could only call Eugene's name over and over as if that would somehow bring him back. A few weeks later in jail, Bobby hung himself with a bedsheet. We didn't even have enough time to forgive him. He punished himself for his sins. My father went on a legendary drinking binge. My mother went to church every single day. It was all booze and God and booze and God and booze and God. We lost my grandmother and Eugene. How much loss were we supposed to endure? I felt hopeless and stupid. I needed books. I wanted books. And I drew cartoons. I was mad at God. I was mad at Jesus, and they were mocking me, so I mocked them. I hoped I could find more cartoons that would help me. And I hoped I could find stories that would help me. So I looked up the word grief in the dictionary. I wanted to find out everything I could about grief. I wanted to know why my family had been given so much to grieve about. And then I discovered the answer. Go ahead, students, and read it on your own. The cartoon. Okay, so it was Gordy who showed me a book written by the guy who knew the answer. It was, I always say this wrong, Euripides, the Greek writer from the 5th century BC, a way old dude. In one of his plays, Medea says, "What greater grief than the loss of one's native land?" I read that and thought, well, of course, man, we Indians have lost everything. We lost our native land. We've lost our languages. We've lost our songs and dances. We've lost each other. But we only know how to lose and be lost. But it's more than that, too. I mean, the thing is, Medea was so distraught by the world and felt so betrayed that she murdered her own kids. She thought the world was that joyless. And after Eugene's funeral, I agreed with her. I could have easily killed myself, killed my mother and father, killed the birds, killed the trees, and killed the oxygen in the air. More than anything, I wanted to kill God. I was joyless. I mean, I can't even tell you how I found the strength to get up every morning. And yet every morning I did get up and go to school. Well, no, that's not exactly true. I was so depressed, I thought about dropping out of Reardon. I thought about going back to Wellpinit. I blamed myself for all of the deaths. I had cursed my family. I had left the tribe and had broken something inside of all of us. And I was now being punished for that. No, my family was being punished. I was healthy and alive. And then after my 15th or 20th missed day of school, I sat in my social studies classroom with Mrs. Jeremy. Mrs. Jeremy was an old bird who taught at Reardon for 35 years. I slumped into class and I sat in the back of the room. Oh, class, she said. We have a special guest here today. It's Arnold Spirit. I didn't realize you still went to school. This school, Mr. Spirit. The classroom was quiet. They all knew that my family had been living inside of a grief storm. And had this teacher just mocked me for that? What did you say? Just say, I asked her. Oh, you really shouldn't be missing this much class, she said. If I'd been stronger, I would have stood up to her. I would have called her names. I would have walked across the room and slapped her. But I was too broken. Instead, it was Gordy who defended me. He stood with his textbook and dropped it. He looked so strong. He looked like a warrior. He was protecting me like Rowdy used to protect me. Of course, Rowdy would have thrown the book at the teacher and then punched her. Gordy showed a lot of courage in standing up to a teacher like that, and his courage inspired others. Penelope stood and dropped her textbook, and then Roger stood and dropped his textbook. Boom. Then the basketball players did the same thing. Boom, boom, boom. And then Miss Jeremy flinched each and every time as if she'd been kicked in the crotch. Boom. Then all of my classmates walked out of the room. A spontaneous demonstration. Of course, I probably should have walked out with them. It would have been more poetic. It would have made more sense. Or perhaps my friends should have realized that they shouldn't have left behind the freaking reason for their protest. And that thought just cracked me up. It was like my friends had walked over the backs of baby seals in order to get to the beach where they could protest against the slaughter of baby seals. Okay, so maybe it wasn't that bad, but it was funny. What are you laughing at? Mrs. Jeremy asked me. Well, I used to think the world was broken down by tribes, I said, by black and white, by Indian and white. But I know that isn't true. The world is only broken into two tribes, the people who are assholes and the people who are not. I walked out of the classroom and I felt like dancing and singing. It all gave me hope. It gave me a little bit of joy. And I kept trying to find the little pieces of joy in my life. That's the only way I managed to make it through all of the death and change. I made a list of the people who had given me the most joy in my life. Rowdy, my mother, my father, my grandmother, Eugene, Coach, Roger, Gordy, Penelope, even if she only partially loves me. I made a list of the musicians who had played the most joyous music. Patsy Cline, my mother's favorite. Hank Williams, my father's favorite. Jimi Hendrix, my grandmother's favorite. Guns N' Roses, my big sister's favorite. White Stripes, my favorite. I made a list of my favorite foods: pizza and chocolate pudding, peanut butter and jelly, banana cream pie, fried chicken, mac and cheese, hamburgers, french fries, grapes. I made a list of my favorite books: The Grapes of Wrath, Catcher in the Rye, Fat Kid Rules the World, Tangerine, Feed, Catalyst, The Invisible Man, Fool's Crow, Jar of Fools. I made a list of my favorite basketball players: Dwayne Wade, Shane Battier, Steve Nash, Ray Allen, Adam Morrison, Julius Erving, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, George Gervin, and Muggsy Bogues. I kept making list after list of things that made me feel joy. And I kept drawing cartoons of things that made me angry. I keep writing and rewriting and drawing and redrawing and thinking, rethinking and revising and re-editing. It became my grieving ceremony. We'll stop there.